Hello and welcome to MK Rants, the channel where I, your host MK, take you on a magical journey through anime, cartoons, comics, and manga. Today's topic, Fairy Tail. So, for a basic introduction, yes, I am trying something different. I decided that I would look for concept art for the show and I would try to just include like snippets of those. Some of it is not the best quality because, let's be real, I'm not gonna dig through Twitter and Reddit, but I ended up finding this cool DeviantArt page that actually had some cool concept art, so I might link that. Also, this video has been in the work for months. I'm not gonna lie to you. I actually had a version already almost done, basically, but I got a new computer and I lost it. I don't know where it is. It's unrecoverable. It's not on my old disk. It's very tragic. So, and honestly, just from watching the show to sitting down and writing these notes to like recording and editing it all together, it's kind of like a really big deal for me. And it's just a good anime. Now, I am aware that there are a bunch of topics on this. I know the YouTuber Just Stop made a video about Fairy Tail like a year or two ago at this point. I have not watched it at the time of this recording. I've watched a couple others, but I'm gonna link it in a playlist with a bunch of other like cool, just like Fairy Tail video essays that I found really helpful and like informative in like creating this. So people just love to rag on this anime, but I personally really loved it. And it's dumb and it's just funny and it actually makes me cry, laugh, and I also enjoy the filler of this anime. And I'm not gonna lie, I've seen a lot of shonen anime, and so for the sake of my sanity and yours, I'm just not gonna add that list here, but compared to many shonens, it stands out from the art to the characters to the voice acting. I really believe that the show needs more positive press. I'm gonna bring attention to it. I also need to note that I did a lot of video and anime watching, so like I said before, I'm just gonna link that playlist. And this video has probably been taking months at this point. It's probably been like 6 months since I last uploaded. Also, disclaimer, if the audio sounds funky, it's because I moved and I'm just trying to get my sound together. I'm not like compressed into like a small space. So yeah. So first off, we're gonna look at the cast because we could be here forever, we're just gonna talk about the main characters and maybe a couple side characters. Spoiler alert, I don't talk about side characters. So first up is the titular fireborn Natsu. He's the hot-tempered and food-obsessed children protagonist. And let's be real, people hate this anime, and I'm betting 2 cents that Natsu probably just gets called a carbon copy of Naruto, and I'm not the biggest fan of that comparison. For one, it's very clear that Natsu is very distinct from the beginning. He's a crazy dragon slayer who wants to find his dragon dad and also just loves his friends and is down to fight anyone. Naruto is loud and sickeningly in love with Sakura, who is like a plank of wood, and it still tries to be friends with Sasuke. I don't get it. Let the man go, Naruto. It's frustrating. I never finished Naruto and I freaking hated it. No, I'm not watching Shippuden. And also has like no friends whatsoever. So I mean, Natsu is just better. Plus he has good chemistry with his guildmates. He's very cool with Urza, and his rivals with Gray, even though they really aren't. They're like that frenemies trope, but like Asta and Yuno could never pull that off. And he has a cat friend named Happy. And he has everything he needs. Plus fire magic is just dope. He eats fire, guys. Like just pure fire. I don't know how to, him and Lucy interacting is just so wholesome, and he has no shame, like just in general, and is just a really good friend to her. When they work when they work together, they have really just like good chemistry and they bounce off each other super nicely. Also, who doesn't feel motivated to beat, like after like Natsu beats someone up like long enough and wins after struggling? It's phenomenal. And also just him eating fire and fire adjacent things is just amazing and inspiring. And the manga author specifically knows fashion, and Natsu has some of the most fire, get it? Fire, I'll see myself out. Lucy. Wait, I'm not gonna hate on Lucy. Yes, I'm not. I actually have a lot of positive feelings towards Lucy, especially when it comes to her relationships as her and her guildmates, become closer along with her and her celestial spirits. She feels like a good character, and as we get into later seasons, we see her come into herself more. Her spirits are her family, and she shows a lot of compassion to them, and is really the heart of the show, or rather the main, the titular, main protagonist group, and I love that. The only complaint that I've heard for the most part is from my family is that Lucy tends to be the center of most arcs because she's the linchpin to it all, and also something that I've just heard from the community in general is she gets really overshadowed in a lot of the arcs, and that's fine, I get it, but when comparing it to more modern shonens Jujutsu Kaisen, I don't necessarily think that's a fair comparison, but Lucy, I think comparing it to shonens of its time and the early 2000s, I do actually think that she's actually one of the better characters out there. So I feel a need to elaborate on this statement in particular, because when I say it's unfair to compare Lucy to more modern anime, I mean in the sense that tropes in shonen have definitely evolved, and so at the time, all things considering, Lucy would have definitely stood out amongst the female characters of that time, especially in the supporting cast. So think of the Narutos, the One Piece, the Dragon Balls. She stood out amongst the lineup, and I think I've heard really good things about One Piece's characters. I started watching One Piece. I personally have not gotten into it yet, but I would definitely say for the early 2000s, early 2010s, Lucy stands out amongst her lineup, and I think that comparing her to more modern shonens, like I said, Jujutsu Kaisen, is unfair because I think it's not a fair comparison, again, because tropes have definitely evolved, and people have stopped seeing shonen women and being yes, merchandise opportunity. It's more of oh, she's a character, we're gonna treat her like she has a sort of role and is a nuanced character. Again, I just felt I need to elaborate on this note a little bit more, just because I think that it is a distinction that should be made when talking about shonen and comparing certain shonens to each other, because I think that's something that can get often overlooked. That's why I think the big three is kind of the big three of anime is kind of a dumb concept now, because I think that the anime that we talk about when thinking about the big three is kind of an outdated concept at the time. But that's a video for another time. So yeah, that was just me. Again, I will get you back to your regularly scheduled program, but I need to feel I needed to elaborate. Bye. And I just appreciate it. And honestly, I don't mind that she's the center of most arcs, because the canonical explanation to this is that celestial wizards are rare and really hard to come by in the time period that they live in. Put a pin in that. We'll come back to it later. I promise. Gray. I don't really know what to put for this segment. One thing that comes to mind is he has some of the best clothes. I'm not kidding. Looking back at the show, it's a shame that he refuses to keep his tops on for more than one episode. I freaking love his pants. He wears phenomenal clothes. Hi, it's me again. I'm sure I'll get tired of hearing my voice eventually popping in, but when I wrote the segment, I was just really quickly trying to jot down notes for each of the characters, and I think you could very clearly tell which distinction which ones distinctly were not my favorite. And I think Ray wasn't my favorite, definitely was not my favorite of the main cast, but I think I did him disservice here. I actually do think his development was really well, and I do think after finishing the Taro's arc, he definitely got respect, I think, from me in particular. I always thought his shtick of he has to be in underwear all the time got really boring really quickly. My phone just went off. Who is that? Okay, anyway. I think that overall he had really good development, and it was nice to see him develop positively as a character. He definitely did have to struggle against his own personal demons, but I did think that he ended up getting some cool magic powers that really did help him, and I think that his earlier fights with Leon definitely did help solidify him as a character who had a lot of past trauma, but that he was working towards improving himself and making sure that he was able to move past it in a way that made him feel like he had redeemed himself. And it was also just nice to see him be explored as more than just as a token like rival character in the shonen anime. Again, it was really good, and I think that Gray often gets overlooked when talking about, you know, shonen like sidekicks, if that makes sense. But I think he definitely does stand out, and I think his development was really good and did help flush him out as a character as a whole. He definitely did become better as the show went on, and we definitely explored him more in a way that I think, you know, the other characters didn't get as much, but I think he definitely got some of the better character development overall, and that was, I think, really good and helped me really formulate my final thoughts on Gray. But I still stand by the outfit thing. His outfits were really fire. Urza. Now, Urza is just awesome. I feel like that statement is not necessary, but you know, why not? I also think that she gets along with Gray, and they have some of the best outfits. It's ironic considering she's probably the one who's meant to have the best outfits. I don't know if you heard that, but like my dog's like breathing really heavy. I had to lock him out. But anyway, yeah, it's ironic considering she's probably the one who meant to have like the best outfits because of her magic. Fun fact, I googled writing my notes, and Titania, which is Urza's nickname, actually seems to be credited, from my limited knowledge and, you know, wordpress.com, to Shakespeare, because this is what it said. It said her origins seem to be Elizabethan. In 1590, Edmund Spenser made his fairy queen a descendant of Fairy Queen, a descendant of Titania, but the character was most explicitly and effectively introduced into fairy lore by William Shakespeare in A Midsummer Night's Dream, which is funny because I had always assumed that it had like Norse or like Welsh mythology, but I guess not. Sorry for the tangent, but I had also started watching Ancient Magnus Bride around the time, so I was kind of just, and they actually do have like a fae queen named like Titania, and I was like, oh, I wonder if there's like a reason why these characters are named Titania. And for context, Urza is called like Queen of the Fairies, so that's why her nickname is Titania. And honestly, Urza just has some of the best character development, and I think my favorite moment is when we find out that she's not really confident in armor. I meant outside of armor, not in armor. Oops. Which is, I believe, in season 1, close to the Tower of Heaven arc, or like right at the start of that. And she just works to accept the trauma she's had to live through in the Tower of Heaven, and her trauma really doesn't define her, but she's able to work past it. And honestly, it's phenomenal. She and her team's relationships are just adorable. She's like the best older sister group, like mom friend, and I'm here for it. She has small goals that make her happy, like something from a picnic to finding the best strawberry. She's just a ball of wholesomeness over that like tough exterior. She also grows along with Jalal, who I'm gonna talk about in a minute, but I genuinely love Urza, and I think she's one of the best girls in the entire anime. Now we're going to talk about Wendy, and I'm putting Wendy here because she's not part of Fairy Tail Team B introduced in the Grand Magic Games arc. Plus, after she's introduced, she becomes like the gang's little sister. She's amazing, and she also grows into her own as we get into later seasons, especially as we start to see her destroy, you know, like the more altering like faces. Those were good. She also just starts off from a shy little like dragon slayer working for a guild that's literally just illusions to having a connection with Jalal. I will get to him in a minute. Please give me a minute. I should have said please give me a second, but I'm not refilming that. I'm not the biggest fan of Carla though. However, I feel like I glossed over Carla a lot in this section. But to elaborate more, I just don't find her that compelling of a character. I think that she just genuinely doesn't really add anything to the group dynamic. I think especially because Happy already fills a pretty key like role within the group itself, so I don't think Carla was that necessary of an addition. But I think that because all of the Dragon Slayers have what's called X-Seeds, which is the species that Happy and Carla fall into along with Gajiel's Panther Lily, I can see why they definitely wanted Carla, but I can also definitely see the drawbacks of which Carla definitely had, especially because her personality is definitely the stuck-up older mother of the group, and I think Urza kind of filled that role a lot better. And because Urza was the same age, it also made more sense within like the character dynamic of the group as a whole. It doesn't necessarily mean that Carla was a bad character, it just felt like her personality was just really, really not beneficial to the overall dynamic, and I wish she could have been a little bit less like a more mature version of Urza, I guess, and more of like a combination between Panther Lily and Happy. And I think Panther Lily definitely represented what Carla lacked, and I think that's why I think Carla just as a whole was not my favorite of the Exceeds that we see in the entire show, and let alone like the franchise, which I think is definitely, it says something of its own rather than something that feels like it was copied and pasted from other character dynamics. And I think overall though, on their own, Wendy and Carla do have really good chemistry, and I think that it's okay just to dislike the characters. I just feel like putting it in a group setting, Carla just does not fit any of the rules that you would expect, especially in a traditional 5-man band, which I think is kind of like what the main group had with, you know, Wendy, Natsu, Lucy, Gray, and Urza. And then Happy was just like the little extra guy, and I think Carla definitely does not fit. And considering that she and Happy were technically extras, I think that they definitely did not, Carla definitely did make the group feel a little bit overcrowded and definitely did feel really mean and bossy. And while I understand she has good intentions because she cares about Wendy, it doesn't come across the best, if that makes sense. And I think that Carla as a character is too brash and just too like aggressive in like a well-meaning way, and I think that it definitely did soil my view of Carla as a whole in the context of the story. And so I have a lot of complicated thoughts towards Carla, but I don't think that she brings Wendy down in any way. I think that I think Wendy can stand out a lot more on her own, especially when she's given those moments instead of them always being with Carla, if that makes sense. But yeah, Carla was just not my favorite of the characters, and she might actually be honestly one of my least favorites in the entire show, which is a shame. And then I think that her learning transformation magic kind of defeated the whole their Exceeds. It's kind of like a big thing because Exceeds are like their own entities, right? Like their own magical beings. And so I think by giving her those kinds of magic powers, it might have like sullied her role as a character as well. And I think that they definitely wanted her to be marketable and more than just like, oh, it's a cute cat sidekick, because I think like I said, Happy filled that role pretty well. And so I think they were just trying to give Carla a more distinct look and to make her more recognizable, especially because of the 1-year time skip. And so it was kind of just more vital for I'm yawning. And so I think they just found it vital to have her be more recognizable, more memorable after that. But I think again, by giving her that magic, it like dulled her down a bit, and it like made her more generic in a sense, and it just made her a cute kawaii anime girl instead of like developing her instead in like a way. And I think Edelus, like when we got to Edelus, that was kind of Carla's arc, and it was definitely a way to show her as a character. And I don't necessarily think that it helped, but it definitely didn't make her a good character. It made her a better character, but a good one nonetheless. And I don't think it actually like changed her behavior at all. And so I think by the time we got to this point of her getting transformation magic, I think it kind of showed that like the whole Edelus thing for her wasn't was relevant in like giving her a character and like explaining that, like, you know, the whole Edelus thing, but it definitely didn't help develop her in the long run. And I think that she suffered for it, and I think that because of that, making her a cute kawaii cat girl definitely made her seem more of like the show is profitable, and so we're gonna try and make figures out of it. but it didn't really, I don't necessarily think that it accomplished what they wanted to, and I think it kind of, like, looking back on it, really muddles her whole Endless, like, exploration and, like, arc, because Carla is a complex character. I just think that after the Endless arc, they didn't know what to do with her, and so they kind of just made her something that she kind of was and wasn't at the same time. It was really weird, and I don't hate Carla, I just hate what they did to her, and I think they really didn't take Endless into account when keeping her as a character. Like, they kind of, like, and it's the same, I think, with, like, a good chunk, if not all of the Exceeds. I think the only one that really had anything was Panther Lily. I think as an Exceed, he definitely had more character development, and he becomes a supporting character later on, and I think that's definitely what the Exceeds originally were. They were supporting characters, and they meant to do something. They were meant to have something to do with the Dragon Slayers, and I'm tired. Oh my gosh. And so I think that they definitely tried giving them a spotlight, which worked, but in Carla's case, it didn't affect her in the long run, and that was probably the biggest downside to Carla as a whole. Other than that, though, I don't like the transformation magic choice. I think that was really bad, especially because none of the other Exceeds have other magics. I think they just want to make Carla more interesting. So yeah, I think Carla's complicated, and my thoughts are even more complicated, but I felt like it was unfair to kind of, like, gloss over her, because she kind of is important when it comes to Wendy and in context of, like, the overall story. As a whole, Exceeds aren't my favorite thing about Fairy Tail, but they are some of the best. I would love a little Exceed if I'm being completely honest, but yeah, Carla just wasn't it for me personally. Thank you. Lucy, her outfits are fun, and so are Wendy's are just so cute. I freaking love them. Wendy becomes stronger, and she can eventually hold her own even with some struggle, and that's awesome, especially because we see Natsu Gabriel points of comparison with the Dragon Slayers. It's also funny to see her develop the signature motion sickness that all the Dragon Slayers get. Wendy is also the one, if not the only, healer in, like, Fairy Tail, so she fits into the role of the heart or healer in the traditional 5-man band. She's just amazing. Happy. I hate the way he sounds in the original Japanese. Like, genuinely, him going Lucy makes you want to die inside. I think his English voice actor does a better job at making Happy seem tolerable. I also want to mention that technically was hatched by Natsu and Lizana. So it'd be funny if Happy called Lizana mom or mother as a joke every now and again. The plot and stuff. Let's be real, the first episode is bad, but it's important in setting up the core dynamic between Lucy, Natsu, and Happy. But once we see the guild, it all goes uphill from there. Their dynamics are just good, and they really do play off of each other. And even the separate groups, like, they all have their own intricate, like, chemistry. And even when they're all together, they seem to play very important roles. Normally, people will rank or talk about the arcs, but I don't see the point, because honestly, you could just search for those kinds of videos on YouTube, and I have some in the playlist that, again, I will link. So I wanted to talk about the structure of the show. Unlike Black Clover, Fairy Tail has good ratios of filler to actual story. The biggest filler chunks are between episodes 125 and 150, for a total of 25 filler episodes, and 202 to 226, coming at 24 episodes of filler. This does not count the 11 manga canon filler episodes, so it's around 60 filler episodes out of 328 episodes. By the account of AnimeFillerList.com, that's around 19%. That's good. All things considered, Black Clover is around 10%, and Inuyasha is at 19% full of filler compared to the story. And, you know, Naruto Shippuden clocks in at 41. Like, I don't get why Fairy Tail gets the short end of the stick when obviously a lot of the more established and classic titles have much more filler. I also want to mention here that there's 8 seasons to this anime. However, I will state that for the English dub release, the way they divided the seasons is very well done, because it kind of divides into the arcs. You know, it divides into each arc, so each season is a self-contained story arc or 2 mini story arcs, which I think is really good. And the best part about the filler, is that like it's actually good. None of it's pet because it does something clever. It develops side characters more. Because the guild is a big part of the show, along with the other guilds, the filler takes time to write and create episodes where we see them become more than just background characters. Like genuinely, I didn't expect an episode about Parfum Guy to create a zombie apocalypse to be so good. Even the kiddo of the sniper couple got an episode, and I'm not gonna lie, it was so heartwarming, and I love the sniper couple. So just seeing their kid have an episode, it was gorgeous. Now the overall plot genuinely can be just boiled down to Zeref being evil, and so all of his creations are trying to awaken him blit. The funny thing is, Zeref is just walking around the whole time being depressed, yet somehow it's so good, and they make a good chunk of the evil demon people and cults, I wish I was joking, be interesting and complex. Some of them have been around for years, guys, like millennia, and so their whole world would come crashing down, and that's funny. Also, your leader trained the Fairy Tail Guild's first members, so I think that's also really funny. The arcs also feed into each other and feel complete and nicely placed for the most part. The characters for the main group especially get good development, and it's nice because I think in a long-running series like this, any change to the status quo is really appreciated. I feel the need to say that after we get an arc, we need a cooldown period of like an episode or 2, and then we need like an episode and a half that feeds into the next arc. And I think this is a good thing to have, because a cooldown period is a good thing when we need to process the big events of the last arc. And I think Black Clover definitely suffered because of the lack of like good filler. The time skip. So this is the part of the story I was definitely scared about, simply because time skips are often very jarring and are written over, and it becomes a background element. However, I do think that the time skip worked well in this case, because the author shows us all of the fallout when the guild, when guild members were really absent for like 7 years, and like what the top members being gone causes. For one, we see how after 7 years they were still able to hold together even after being chased out of the original guild hall, and they were still able to have a small farm-esque guild hall. We also see the closure that we needed to see between Lucy and her dad, because while he did die in those 7 years, he still played a role in her life, such as paying off her apartment and buying her gifts for her birthday, and even writing her letters despite the fact that he knew she might not ever come home again. We also see that what guilds popped up over the course of the 7 years, and it also brings us into the Grand Magic Games, which were a new way of ranking the wizard guilds, and I love that idea, honestly. I think for a series like this, especially tournament arcs are definitely good, because there has to be something to like establish the status quo. This is a good example for us to see why Fairy Tail is one of the top guilds, And believe it or not, there's also a later 1-year time skip where Fairy Tail breaks up, and after like a major spoilery plot point. But again, it's dealt with in a way that makes sense in the story and how it's placed. However, I didn't think it was handled as well after coming off of Tenro Island's 7-year time skip. Also, it's sad that they didn't keep Natsu's longer hair. It would have been nice to see that change, especially because, like I said, all these characters did develop over that like 1 year. And to change the status quo for a series as long as this would have been so good and so welcome. Now we're going to move on to the main antagonists. Now, this is the segment where I give an honorable mention to the Butt Jiggle Bandits. They were hilarious. They showed up more than once too, and I wish they would show up more. I freaking love them. Now, the main villain I want to talk about here is Jalal. This man is a mess, and for one, he was a child prisoner with Urza in the Tower of Heaven, because we love people working past their trauma and making amends with their mistakes, especially in Jalal's case, because Jalal definitely goes through development, and in the 7-year time skip specifically, we see how he and Melody kind of recover after losing Ultir, and we just see them become better people, start their own like unregistered guild, trying to make amends for all of the mistakes they caused. I think that's something super important, and I wish Jalal is just being Jalal, but I wish that it was a concept that we see more of. But even so, like, Jalal has definitely more history than we give him credit for in this series, and I think he is just a big part of the whole thing. And then there's Mystigan. We're gonna make this connection to Wendy in 3, 2, 1, because Mystigan is a alternate reality version. This place is called Edelus, by the way. It was a whole thing of Jalal. I'm not kidding. He literally becomes the king of Edelus, the other world, after the guild from both Earthland, our main team, and then, and then the other guys, Edelus, and becomes the new ruler of Edelus. It was hilarious. Then there's Magic Council Jalal, who was an evil clone of a normal evil Jalal before he became good again and worked to fix his mistakes. But I think that might be all the versions of Jalal, yet I'm also thinking about the time where he died and the Orasian Saints revived him. But he has a connection to Wendy because Wendy traveled around for a bit temporarily with the Edelus Jalal. I think that's covering all of our bases. And when I say this character is just complex, I mean complex. At this moment, Jalal is working to, make his mistakes better, like I stated earlier. And also, he's traveling along with the rest of the Orasian Saints, who are kind of a big deal. And he was a hot mess of a character at first, but he got alright after a while. Now, we're talking about Zeref. Now, we really have 2 big villains, and I don't count the groups of evil people minus the Orasian Saints, so I guess technically 3. I really only have this rule because we see these villains more than once. So I've already talked about Jalal, and now I'm going to talk about Zeref. He is important because he technically is the whole reason the gang has to fight against all of these evil people due to really big plot story reasons that I'm not going to mention here. And I just, go watch the show because, it goes deep. The only thing I'm gonna say is that he has a really important connection to Fairy Tail and Nasu separately. Very separately. I need to explicitly say that. Separately. His connection with Mavis Vermilion, the first guild master, was phenomenal. But other than that, I can't necessarily say that I was a huge fan of him because I haven't gotten to the end of the show yet. I'll update this when I have. Okay, so when I first wrote this script, I had yet to reach the point in the story where I actually finished the Mavis and Zeref story. And oh my, it was not what I was expecting. It hit differently, especially after a whole bunch of build-up and little bits and pieces given through us throughout the series. I truly believe that the build-up was worth the payoff. Zeref as a character is phenomenal and is truly more than just the ultimate main bad of the series. The Orasian Saints. Now, like Jalal, we have several versions of the Orasian Saints. We have the classic Saints, the Neo-Orasian Saints, and then Saints, and then the Saints, but Midnight, who was one of the village, switched genders, and they kept the same voice actor, and also no giant snake. This is okay. Well, let's be real here. They're all really necessarily one-note characters, but they do definitely have interpersonal connections. I know Angular Jawman definitely has a connection with the Mafia geometrical Minecraft looking man. It was a very interesting episode, to say the least, and let's be real, Eric is probably my favorite, and he deserves to be best friends with Kiana, aka Kibelios, aka the human version of the snake that he had because it was cursed to be a snake. Now, believe it or not, I actually have a theory about this. Is this fanfic? I don't necessarily know, but I'm just gonna say this. Now, for one, I think it was actually Eric who put the curse on her originally because he was still discovering what magic suited him best. Kiana would only be a year or 2 younger than Eric. By default, Kiana wants to be human again because, let's be real, being a snake isn't all that great. He discovers her one night and gives her food and shelter, only till a few days later does he realize that was the villager he cursed by accident. By the time he goes back, Kiana is too tired and hungry, so when Eric brings her back to the others, they just think it's a pet snake. They do act a little confused, when Eric insists that Kiana, now renamed Kibelios, has to have a good human-sized portion of food and has to bathe with the other female members of the group. They just think that he loves the snake too much, but eventually Kibelios starts to be, so to speak, a good magic helper and forgets her human life, thinking it was just that her memories are just dreams. I also assume that because of the nature of Eric's magic, when she's a human, she's hard of hearing, and because she eventually becomes a waiter at Fairy Tail, it can be hard because if it's just a loud environment. And I have a cool idea that she figures out how to make hearing aids with like lacrima crystals, which are like these things that store magic. Yet the one voice she can necessarily hear like perfectly is Eric's, because they kind of have a mental link that it takes the other members of the guild to realize. This is definitely a segment that I didn't plan on writing, but I ended up growing really fond of it. I think that this segment just definitely illustrates that these characters have a lot of potential, like a lot of story potential. And I feel the need to mention that Eric has a lot of sound-based magic, or rather, yeah, a lot of sound-based magic, and that he can just hear things really well. I mean, I technically think he has like a lacrima crystal on his back, so I think it makes him like a dragon slayer. I don't know, it's really weird. I don't know. Speaking of which, the magic system. I did bring a Fairy Tail in my Black Clover magic system video, but to recap it here, it's really good because it's not super defined. The most defined we get is the Dragon Slayers and Zeref. This is definitely beneficial because it lets room for more crazy magic types and does not have to fit into one system like Black Clover tries to do. The story also just gives room for more Hold on, I accidentally turned off my mic, but I noticed it before I kept recording. But so like I said, the Magic Council in Fairy Tail is arguably the most important part of the show outside of the villains, and it's due to them being constantly stabbed in the back by the villains of the show, and they all die minus like this one guy later on the line. It's really sick, honestly. I really liked it. It was a really good way to switch up the status quo, which I liked. The Warriors of the Nation get an important piece of story later, like on in the series, but aside from that, they don't really do much. They're really one note and kind of like bland, if I'm being completely honest. Like, I don't necessarily like the Royals, but they're there and they're okay. I don't love them. I don't hate them. They're just fine. The world building. Because of the nature of the show, the guilds are definitely the biggest aspect of this. Yet because of how the arcs are organized and structured, we get both arcs focusing on the guild itself and other guild members as well. They're also separated out across the map far enough so that all the halls and towns feel distinct and unique, which is very good and helps separate themselves visually. Mermaid Scale is located near the beach and is a guild full of notably all women. Blue Pegasus has a gorgeous guild hall and what looks like a built-in bar. Sabretooth is big and feels empty at first, but after, certain arcs, the guild is full of life and happy with guild members. We just see that the guilds are, aren't just specific to an area, and so they travel around. All the guilds have connections between each other, and it's definitely illustrating the Grand Magic games a lot. And they just know each other. It's so good. Not to bring up my favorite punching Black Clover, but they don't do that well because the teams are very area specific, and if they travel, they don't interact with the other groups much, and yet they keep introducing other characters to help fill out the roster. And when they do interact with Asta, Asta just likes to get another harem edition. The animation. The anime loves color. Based on the arc, it'll change its color schemes and looks so good. Plus, the characters look still recognizable even with slightly different color schemes. For example, the last season was super bright and colorful, but the season with the Grand Magic Games is a bit more desaturated in tone. It's really good, and I really personally liked it. They also change outfits to the regular. For the most part, Lucy and Greg change quite often, so does Wendy. Natsu changes his outfit for every now and again. It's basically the same concept, however, and he looks sick with his scarf. And then, of course, there's Urza, who I already mentioned earlier, but her outfits definitely change based on her magic and what is more convenient, because all her armor has different focuses. And they just get better at animating, like, the magic sequences and everything. It looks so good and makes the fight sequences something worth screaming for. The sound effect, or rather, the proper term I think is sound design, is also good, and it helps add dimension to the scenes, The music. The intros are honestly really good, and though there are waves between the good and the bad, I thought that they had peaked at Roxy Boy for the Endless arc, but no, the intro to the Zero arc, Ashita no Anarase, is so good, and the way they edit it is so well fitting that when they use it for the normal story, it looks so bad. The soundtrack is good too. It fits the tone of the story and it slaps. The composers know what they're doing and it helps give the tone of the show a cohesiveness. Plus, they don't use new tracks often and they just get better at using the materials they have. Fairy Tail Zero. I'm putting this as a last part of my, a last little segment because, Fairy Tail Zero is so good, and I'm glad we got development on some of the first guild members. It's also nice to have an understanding of the importance of Tenro Island as we see how maybe and why Loxus has the type of magic he is. He's the Fairy Tail Masters. He's a Fairy Tail... Okay, so he is the grandson... No, he's the great-grandson of one of the OG Fairy Tail members. And honestly, for one, and I can't find the name of that guy because it's on, I can't find the wiki. And I'm not going to watch the episode because I don't need emotional damage. Sorry, I take a sip of water. This is really exhausting, guys. This arc was my personal favorite, and oh my gosh, it was a tearjerker. I was sobbing by the end of it and it was destroying me. 10 out of 10, I would watch again. People hating Fairy Tail. To start with this hot swamp water treading, I'm gonna read this comment I found while watching an Anime Man video about the topic 4 issues ago. Probably around 5 now. By Mr. Goonie Tawam, Fairy Tail is 100% a fantasy-themed feel-good anime. That's pretty much it. The power of friendship conquers all type anime. It's well made and regarded what you're looking for. And for any tidbit of reality like real struggles, protagonist death, or just friendships not being the solution to every single problem, then I'd say this isn't for you. The art is great and the humor is okay as well. I think the comparison to other shonen like One Piece or Naruto is kind of unjustified and ironic because I've brought up Black Clover a couple times, but let's be real. Black Clover is the most mediocre thing I've watched. And I think a big chunk of it is probably just nostalgia because when the big 3 were really was a thing, this is like Bleach, Naruto, and One Piece or whatever, it was like the late 90s, early 00s. So by the time the 2010 anime Fairy Tail, was making its rounds, people were really already keeping up with, Bleach, Naruto, and One Piece, and it can be hard to find a reason to like a new show or feel like you have to get invested in it. Plus, as a bonus, the show is by default simple and in the beginning before it gets really heavy. So the funny part is that is that all the anime that I just watched start the same way. Like, I watched all the shows past the first 6 episodes. Like, why? Like, I don't necessarily understand why you hate it. Okay, so I'm going to re-record this segment because I think that while I stand by what I said, I think when I wrote it, I definitely was in more of a rage moment. So I wanted to take a look at the big booba argument. And I think that's a good place to like really take a look at this because I think this anime definitely fit into the more classic shonen archetype of and I think that I think it's unfair again to compare it to modern shonen because I think that issue is less prevalent in more modern shonen anime. And I say shonen like as an all-encompassing genre. I'm not, or like demographic. I'm not separating it, but I'm definitely, when I say shonen, I definitely talk about the more battle-based animes. And I think it's important to mention that because I think isekai has gotten worse. I have not watched a good isekai in a while. Let's be real. Isekai is a scary genre now, especially because it's a bunch of copy-pastes of each other, but I think comparing it to 2 more classic shonens like Naruto and One Piece and Bleach definitely does help illustrate that Fairy Tail is definitely not like is I guess a product of its time because it was a weird transition in the 2010s because we were going from super rad mecha anime to the 90s and early 2000s to now like we're improving the way we see like women in a lot of shonen, and I'm saying that, and then I also don't necessarily think that And I do honestly think that Fairy Tail is still a good example of better female representation, because not only are the women written to be strong, but they can also hold their own, which I think is also super important. I think is one of the factors that we should be looking at when people talk about hating Fairy Tail. And I think for the most part, I think One Piece got worse with the way it represented its female cast, and I don't think that's, and I don't necessarily think that was good. I don't necessarily agree with the choices. And you know, I haven't gotten far enough into One Piece to be like, oh yeah, the women are actually written really well yet, but I've heard good things. And then I would say that I got pretty far in Bleach, and then I kind of thought it was boring after a while. But if I have to say it, I don't think the women were over-sexualized in that show. I think they were treated with decent amount of respect. Again, and then Naruto is just bad. I can't watch Naruto without wanting to implode. But overall, I think that's pretty good. And then of course there's Black Clover. Whenever I think of Black Clover and then I think of the women, I think of that one scene where Mimosa falls on Asta's chest first, completely crushing his skull. That's a really weird scene. I really don't recommend Black Clover if you're a newbie to anime. Please don't watch Black Clover if you're new. Maybe 2 or 3 animes later you'd like it, but like when you first start out, don't do that. That's a really bad idea. But as a whole, from what I saw of Jujutsu Kaisen, I don't think they brought a lot of attention to the body of the female character. I don't remember her name. I really suck at this. And then, of course, I know Demon Slayer, I don't think played a lot of those aspects either. And then everyone is gonna be like, oh, but Mitsuri. But her design was purposeful in a way that I think is important with context. And I don't wanna, and this isn't a Demon Slayer video, but I feel like I need to mention that. And then Spy Family, if you count that as a shonen, I don't necessarily think that is also really sexual towards Yor as a character, and I think that's also really beneficial for the longevity of the franchise. And then I'm also thinking about like Fullmetal Alchemist. That was also really good and it paid a lot of respect, and then to women as a whole. And then I'm thinking of, there's one on my mind. And then I'm also thinking of Hunter x Hunter, which I think definitely paid a lot of respect towards the very limited female cast that it had, because let's be real here, there weren't a lot of women. And then the author took very good care of the characters, and I think what helped was because he's married to the author of Sailor Moon. Power couple. So that I think also helped. And then I feel like there's just a lot of energy that people need to be put, and there's also just like different laws, like not laws, but there's different like cultural aspects to a lot of this, and I think taking a look at demographics is also important, because there's a lot of different like restrictions on like what you can put in cartoons in the US compared to like overseas, or like in like in Japan especially, because like thinking about it, like there is a lot of like weird context things that should be like talked about more, and I think that shonen as a demographic appeals to teenage boys, so I think a lot of it does make sense. As a female like consumer of shonen anime as a whole, I don't think that it's really bad in Fairy Tail, and I think that it's not good either. I think it's very much in the midpoint of the spectrum of like a good and bad representation of women and their bodies, and I think a lot of it is also just like you need to suspend your disbelief for fiction as well. And I think that it proves a big point for me that it's important to understand what you're looking at and why it's being presented to you in that way. And you're not gonna like everything you do, and that's fine. If you don't like seeing women presented in like a really sexual way, then just don't watch shonen anime. don't watch anime as a whole unless you know like what specific genres you should look for. And in which case I would recommend watching shoujo or seinen, which are specifically geared towards towards a female demographic. But I consume a lot of shonen anime, so I'm looking at it through that angle as well, because as a female consumer, I want to enjoy the media I'm watching and not be taken out of the story because of unrealistic expectations. But I also just know how to suspend my disbelief. I think that sounds really controversial, but like, it's how you interact with media that really makes a difference. And I think that the hatred on Fairy Tail is, again, because people cannot suspend their disbelief for certain things. And like, yeah, the magic system is not the best magic system by far. I know there's so many other examples in Western media as well that like have really good like law, like rules and regulations, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're like bad. It just means that like they're presented differently, and I think D&D is a really good example. D&D is a very tight-knit system when like you look at it from like an outsider's perspective, and of course there's just other anime that just completely ignore like the laws they have set up, so like Black Clover, and I think that definitely helped. And I think for me that's like something I could not suspend my disbelief for. Take The Little Mermaid for example, like the live action remake. All of Ariel's sisters looked different, and it suspended people's disbelief for like certain aspects, because yeah, they're all mermaids, yeah, they're all fictional creatures, but like it doesn't make sense how this one guy can have like 7 daughters, right? A lot of it also happened that the queen of like, they gave Ariel a mom, which was fine, and she was the queen of the island, right? But she was black, right? And Eric doesn't look black, and I think his father and then Eric's father was also like dark skinned. I have not watched Little Mermaid, but I think a lot of that happened because like people couldn't suspend their disbelief for that because it didn't fit right? Like it didn't make sense when you looked at it from a different perspective. And I think again, people just struggle to suspend their disbelief, which is completely fine, right? Like, you choose how to interact with media. And I also just think people don't have nostalgia for Fairy Tail. Nostalgia is a big factor in anything, right? Like, I would, like, for me, like, for a lot of people, like, the live action remakes are purposely nostalgia baiting. If you look at the marketing for any of their live action remakes, like Mulan and the Little Mermaid, there is so much nostalgia baiting for the original movie. Like, it is scary because they want the people who grew up with these films to go and watch them in theaters with their kids, because to them that's what's important. So, you know, as a whole, I think nostalgia is a really powerful factor in how people, again, interact with media, because it's how people will interact with anything. So I think that definitely also plays a role in it. And I think because Fairy Tail is a more modern anime, let's be real, it again came in an awkward time where there wasn't like a wave of like new shonens that really were gaining traction. It came in like that midpoint where they were transitioning into new tropes, into a new decade, and so again it just resulted in this big thing of, I don't want to watch this anime, I'm watching like 4 others that I'm trying to keep up with weekly, and streaming wasn't the biggest thing at that time, I don't think. So it was just, and so I think it's a lot, because it's a lot of like, there's so many comments being made about anime in recent years, and I think a lot of it, as anime culture grows and becomes more acceptable in the West, at least in the West, like just in the West, like you would expect people to also look at media with a different eye, and I think that it's happening slowly. It's happening very slowly, but it's happening. And I think a lot of people, again in Japan, like creating a lot of these animes and like manga, have come to the epitome. We need to redefine tropes, and we need to redefine genres, and I think that definitely also helped in creating the new wave of the modern shonen, which we see today, which 10-20 years from now is going to be completely different. Like, I'm just like, who knows, like 10-20 years from now we're gonna have an all shonen, like a shonen just dominated by like a women cast, right? Like, it's so weird to think about. And so people hating on Fairy Tail is really, I think, them hating on tropes at the time because of the time, right? And like, if they're keeping up with more like older anime, like by like 5 years, like a 5-year difference, like I don't know, like One Piece, Naruto, Bleach, all that, like the tropes are there, but they don't see it as prevalent. And if they do, they just, because they've kept on so long, that they're just not going to question it, right? And so something new displaying the same traits to them is like, oh, I've seen this already, I'm already watching a show that's very similar to this, I don't want to watch it. And I think a lot of it is, again, also because Fairy Tail came out at a time where like the big three were like in their really big like trucking along eras, or trucking along, that sounded really bad. And so Fairy Tail displayed a lot of similar elements to that, and so I think a lot of people were like, oh, it's just a rip-off of blank anime or blank manga. So I think, again, that also probably didn't help its reputation. And also, people shouldn't watch an anime based off of the first episode. I would say, for me, if I know if I'm into a series or not, is 3 episodes in, because you never know how good a show is until you watch it, right? And you watch it past the first episode, because the first episode could be the most garbage thing you've ever seen, but then like you but then you like watch more and you're like, wait, this actually isn't so bad. And I think for me that's a big reason why I can't get into a lot of like shoujo anime personally. I think a lot of it has to do with like the first 3 episodes, like I found some good ones, but like they never like catch my attention, right? Like, and I think that's why shonen for me has been like my main like just demographic as a whole, because I like battle anime, right? I've liked Dr. Stone because it's something that I think after like the first episode, really boring, establishing the status quo, that's great, right? But after that we get into like the plot, we get into the story, and so it definitely feels more rounded as a whole, and it goes by a faster pace. So that's why I would say for shoujo the first 4 or 5 episodes, for shonen the first 3, because for shonen things are moving faster, where shoujo things are moving a little bit slower, because it's more slower medium and it's a lot of romance and whatnot. And I think for me personally, I just don't watch a lot of action shoujos, so I think that doesn't help. But I know for shonen you want to watch with like the first 3 episodes, because that, to me, that's the time where you decide, is it good or is it bad, right? And so when I say give Fairy Tail a chance, I'm saying give it more than an episode. I'm not saying that the hate isn't justified, because I see where these people are coming from, but I also see like if they had watched further, their logic would be a little bit less intense, because the more you watch, the more you actually get a feel for the world. And so yes, the first episode may be bad, but I promise you, the more you watch, the more you will enjoy it. And if you don't, that's fine, but at least give it 3 episodes, right? And so I think that's my main argument for like the hatred. If you don't watch the first 3 episodes, at the very least, I wouldn't recommend the show for you, because it's a very complicated thing, right? And I think that's like my one complaint, right? I'm saying complaint with like air quotes, is like people are hating it, but I don't think a lot of people are watching it past the first 3 episodes. And I think a lot of people who also get into anime around the early 2010s, like, know, like, Fairy Tail is actually a decent show, like, but people from, like, 5 years before, right, don't necessarily see it that way, and I think are just blindly hating on it. And I think that that's also like necessary. I think that's definitely a problem, because blind hatred isn't gonna solve the issue. It's not gonna make the medium go away, not the media go away. Fairy Tail is a massive franchise. I hope that that's something that you guys understand. Fairy Tail is a massive franchise now, and I think because it did find the right audience and it did land with certain people. So that is my reaction to the hatred, is I see where you're coming from, but you need to understand not all anime is the same pace, and it doesn't always have to have nostalgia involved. And I'll be the first to admit, not all the arcs in Fairy Tail are good. By a long shot, not all of them are good, but there's still stuff to be gained from it. And each arc is new to you as a first-time viewer, right? And if you avoid spoilers, like me, I personally try to avoid spoilers whenever I watch an anime, like, period. It's important to note that like, you are interacting with this media for the first time, so every arc is gonna be good, and then once you've watched like enough of it, you'll be like, oh, this arc was good, this arc was bad, right? And you'll have your favorites, and those are the moments you choose to go and rewatch. And I think that definitely speaks louder than words, and I hope that makes sense to a lot of you. I'm sorry if this segment doesn't seem like well spoken. I'm definitely doing this by the seat of my pants because I didn't like the way the original one sounded. It sounded really like not like acknowledging any of the criticisms, but I would really, really recommend going and watching Fair and experiencing the whole, like, as like 3 episodes, at the very least 3 episodes, because after that you either love it or you hate it. And I think that's something I think that I have come to terms with, and I think others will struggle to deal with. And I think online, where we have the ability to fight each other over and over again, I think over the same topics, I think it's important to note that, like, not everyone is gonna like the same thing, and that's fine, but we need to understand that, like, some people will like it, and so hating on it blindly and ruining the enjoyment of a piece of media isn't beneficial to anyone. It makes the people who like it scared that they're gonna get ridiculed for liking it, and if someone doesn't like it, then, like, they're scared that they're probably scared that the people who do like it are gonna come attack them if they explain kind of like why they don't like it. And I think that's just a lot to have to, like, deal with. I don't know. And I think this video was me personally trying to really show you that the show, like, is worth more than, like, what people are saying it is, because it's a good show, it's a good anime, and it's something that I think people should at least try and get into. And if you don't like it, that's fine. Just don't hate on the people who do like it. And if you're that one person who's like, I watched Fairy Tail and I don't like it, just don't be a jerk about it. And if you do like it, don't hate on the people who don't like it, right? Like, it's just, that's how you turn people off of a show. But I've said my piece. I think this is the last time I will interrupt you guys in your experience. Thank you so much for just sticking around. Back to the main video. If you made it this far, thank you so much. I know this video is long, but I hope that, like, what I'm doing here is definitely worth the wait. And I've also been, you know, again, I moved, so, like, if the audio is bad, I'm trying to figure out, but I'm glad to try something new. If not, then okay, so actually this is outdated because I didn't change this, but I hope you like that, like but what I ended up writing was, if not, did you like the anime footage I added or the screenshots, because I didn't want to take up space on my computer. But just in general, the concept art was really fun to look for, and I think that it's something that I would, if you find any concept art, like, of Mavis or, like, Zara for, like, Acnologia, like, DM me on Instagram. I would love to see it. Like, genuinely, I cannot find any. It's hilarious. Shout out to the Fairy Tail wiki, by the way. I will link that, and then, like, the DeviantArt page, like I mentioned in the beginning, because, like, that helped me a lot, you know, and just, like, prepping for this video, because it helped me, it, like, gave me background information, character descriptions, etc. And so, like I said, go watch Fairy Tail, and I think the fandom deserves more than what people give it credit for. It's a good anime, it's a good show, and I definitely do think that now that, like, the 100-year, like, arc has been confirmed, it deserves to live in the spotlight. As of right now, I don't really have any other anime projects that I'm working on. This is kind of like my big one that I want to put out of the way. So leave a comment with any suggestion for a new anime you want me to watch, or something like you'd like to see a video on. Because I have this cool new computer, I might, like, start diving into, like, lost anime media like Kenny Lauderdale, but that seems kind of like an expensive endeavor, so I might not do that. But thank you all so much for watching. I hope you guys have an amazing evening. Bye bye.